Welcome to Behind the Mic with AudioFile magazine, where the subjects are audiobooks and the actors who narrate them. I'm Jo Reed, and today I have contributor Kendra Winchester with me. Hello, Kendra.
Hello, Jo. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and tell me, what 3 books are you going to talk about? What's your theme?
Well, today's theme is biographies and memoirs, and I didn't mean to do this, but they're all featuring writers.
That's right. I was noticing that with the list that you sent. They're really good books. Share what they are.
So, the 3 books that I'm talking about today are The Quiet Ear, an investigation of missing sound, a memoir by Raymond Antrobus, performed by the author. Then we have Positive Obsession, The Life and Times of Octavia Butler by Susana M. Morris, read by Karen Murray. And the last one is Baldwin, A Love Story by Nicholas Boggs, performed by Ron Butler.
Okay, so we're beginning with our poet, Raymond Antrobus. Tell us about The Quiet Ear.
Oh, I love this author so much. I love Antrobus's poetry. There's just something really special about it. So when I heard that he had a memoir and was performing the memoir, I knew I had to listen to it as soon as possible. So Raymond Antrobus grew up in East London to a white English mother and a Black Jamaican father. And growing up mixed race really made him feel kind of out of place. It didn't matter if he was in London or Jamaica, like he always felt in between. But more than that, he's also disabled. When he was 6, he was diagnosed as deaf. And what's interesting about his case is that he is very, very hard of hearing to the point that he is deaf, but he has a little bit of sounds that he can't hear, which is why they didn't diagnose him as deaf until he was 6.
Ah, I see. So he can hear some things, but not others.
Yeah, so, like, his range of hearing is very, very narrow, and so, like, he can't hear things that are really high or really low. It's, just very a limited range of sound that he can hear.
Okay. And he's also the narrator of this book, which makes it very
Yes.
interesting. So often people who are deaf have problems speaking. How does he cope with this?
Yes, a lot of people who are deaf have a deaf accent, as they call it, but he is really interesting in that he has an East London accent. He also has a deaf accent, but he's worked with a speech therapist. And, he talks about carrying a lot of shame for being deaf. And part of that was the way that he spoke. But working with a speech therapist for him gave him confidence, but also he kind of accepted who he was and was in that process of accepting his place in the deaf community. And so now he has a lot of pride in the way that he speaks. And, poetry is a huge part of that. He's a performance poet. So he learned to speak and had that practice by performing his poetry.
And his book, The Quiet Ear, that takes us through obviously his growing up. It's a memoir about his life, but is it also a sort of a broader look on being deaf?
It covers a lot of those themes, and he does advocate for deaf people and the deaf community, but it's not a braided memoir. It doesn't go in the history of deafness or
Mhm.
anything like that. It's more his perspective of what it's like being deaf. And he does some education along the way because I imagine that was necessary. So a general audience who wasn't familiar with different things about deaf culture could, follow along more easily. But I really appreciated the balance that he struck in his memoir, educating and sharing his story.
Well, why don't we hear a little bit?
Yeah, so this section is just him kind of introducing things a little bit. I think one of the interesting things about this is you can hear his performance and how much performing poetry has influenced the way that he narrates his audiobook.
All right. This is The Quiet Ear, an investigation of missing sound, a memoir written and read by Raymond Antrobus.
Let me go back then to the sounds of my birth. If I close my eyes, the sounds of my birth come from a million places at once. Wind in the trees by the beeping traffic on the main road, the shrilling bike bells under the canal bridges, the bustling markets, trolleys rolling over grazed pavements, the clanging of the market stall bars, the pound a bowl yelling, roadworks drilling, digging, engines whirring, shutters clanging, the shovels coming down of a hot tarmac, the pop and crash of a lifted manhole covers, the radios blaring in the cars and the offices and the open living room windows, the dogs barking, the rivers running, voices on the train carriages and the buses, bars, galleries, benches by the lake, children on the climbing frame, and children who have tucked themselves into the huts and tunnels on the adventure playgrounds.
That is both lyrical and dynamic writing and narrating. He has a wonderful voice, and you can hear a deaf accent, but it's very, very slight.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the way that he was able to incorporate sound with the way that he performs, in that he's speaking about sound, and so he gives examples of the sounds he is talking about, like working with a speech therapist. He describes the sounds he struggles to pronounce, and I thought that was really effective when, translating the text to an audiobook.
Yeah, and he writes with such great rhythm, and you can hear it in this passage
Yes.
that we just heard.
Yes,
He's such a rhythmic writer.
exactly, exactly. It's a very condensed, and I feel like that's the poet in him, in making every single word count and adding layers of meaning to his writing.
All right. And what's your second book?
So I love, adore even, Octavia E. Butler. So Positive Obsession, The Life and Times of Octavia E. Butler by Susana Morris, performed by Karen Murray, was the top of my listening TBR. I was so excited. And for Octavia Butler, for those who don't know, is a Black science fiction and fantasy writer who mainly worked in the 20th century. And she has this way of capturing big ideas of thought and condensing them into her fiction in this very futuristic, sometimes futuristic, I should say, kind of way. Or maybe it's like on a different planet in science fiction, or maybe it's Kindred, where it's historical, in that her main character time travels from the 70s back to a time when our protagonist's ancestors were enslaved. And so she is able to do all of these different things in such a beautiful and brilliant way.
Yeah, she is a writer of great power and great, great perception.
Yes.
And science fiction is not my home, even a little bit. It is impossible to deny Octavia Butler.
She is so phenomenal. And I knew so little about her life, so I was very excited to jump into this. I didn't know that Octavia Butler was working class and neurodivergent as well. And so, one of the things that Octavia Butler writes about in her journals is what she calls her special interests, which is positive obsession. And that is the thing that drives her to write. And so that's really the inspiration behind the title and the kind of focus that the biographer has in this book.
And Octavia Butler was the first science fiction writer to win a MacArthur.
Which is phenomenal. Like, she is
Yeah,
just fantastic.
which is extraordinary. I mean, what to get one at all, but the first science fiction writer should give us all pause about what an extraordinary writer she is.
Yes, and I think right now we typically have in mind that a writer will go do their MFA and do all of these different very prestigious things. But Octavia Butler, because she's neurodivergent, didn't do well in the classroom. So in fact, she's almost entirely, outside of high school, is entirely self-taught. And she took classes on and off, but it just didn't work for her. And she's also working class. And so those two things, in addition to her being a Black woman in the United States, the time that she lived, really drove her stories and really drove the way that she approached her storytelling and her novels. And I just thought that was a fantastic way to highlight Octavia Butler's career.
And let's talk about Karen Murray's narration. I'm a fan of her. She narrated a novel, Untethered, which I liked, and also very recently, When Women Ran Fifth Avenue, which is a book of nonfiction.
Yeah, she's really fantastic. She's very warm. She's very, like, the way that she performs nonfiction just kind of draws you in. And you kind of have to have a voice that's interesting, but not too interesting for nonfiction, because you want them to pay attention, right?
Yeah, you don't want to overplay.
Right, right. So I think she did that a great job with that. And this is a pretty short audio book. In print, it's like 200 pages long before notes, so it's not very long at all. So I really appreciated this book and the focus that it had, because it didn't do the whole full life kind of thing. It just focused on these particular themes and ideas.
So it's not a chronological biography.
It is chronological, but it doesn't, like, delve deep into her personal life. It mainly focused on her writings about her specific work, which I'll talk about how, that's different from another biography we're gonna look at here in a second, but this is mainly focused on what inspired her writing, in particular, her identity and those intersections there.
Let's hear a little of Karen Murray reading. Do you have to set this up or is it clear?
It's pretty clear. I'm excited to listen to it.
All right. This is Positive Obsession, The Life and Times of Octavia E. Butler. It's by Susanna Morris and read by Karen Murray.
Kindred is usually a reader's gateway to Octavia's work. It is her best-selling novel, frequently mentioned on best books listicles, and assigned on college syllabi. When I talk to fans of her work, they usually gush about Kindred, explaining how the novel changed how they understood slavery and their relationship to it. Writer Damien Duffy, along with John Jennings, who has adapted Kindred and Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents as a graphic novel, described Kindred as a life-changing experience that opened up his understanding of what has been called a peculiar institution. Considering what inspired Octavia, I imagine this is an answer that would please her. Still, Kindred is as much about the time it was conceived and written as it is about the antebellum South.
She does have a warm voice, and she also has the ability, I think, to be very lucid. I've heard her narrate complicated things, and somehow I'm always on point because she is, and she brings me along, and I like where I'm going. There's something just so lovely about her voice.
Yes, exactly. She she has just a beautiful way of performing things, and I think it really keeps your attention as a listener.
Yeah, I feel like, she's putting her arm around you
Mhm.
and just sort of walking you through, like, "Here," not in a patronizing way, just like, "Let me show you."
Yeah, in a very friendly way.
Very friendly. And speaking of friendly, let's get to the last book, which is
So this book has consumed my life for the last month, and that is Baldwin, A Love Story by Nicholas Boggs, performed by Ron Butler. And this comes in at around 24 and a half hours.
I've been listening to it because I am an enormous fan of James Baldwin. So, and this book has gotten amazing, amazing reviews, and I am loving it and loving Ron Butler's narration, which I think is just brilliant.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's so fantastic. This is the first major biography of Baldwin in about 30 years, and it's already been named a finalist for the Kirkus Prize. And so it's just gotten so many great reviews. I love seeing, the updates of the book tour over on Nicholas Boggs's Instagram. But like the title suggests, one of the new things about this book is that it focuses really on Baldwin's love life and, or should I say, the people that he loved, the men that he loved, because not all of the ones that are featured in the book are romantic.
Correct. It's in four parts, we should say, and
Yes.
each one is centered on an intimate relationship.
Yes.
And Buford Delaney, the great, great painter, is the prologue. Baldwin, it doesn't seem as though they were lovers, but he was a mentor to Baldwin, and they were close throughout Delaney's life.
Yes. So the book is centered around these men, and it was just a really interesting way to structure the book. There's also like an interlude in there, but it really follows Baldwin's life to great detail, and it doesn't just focus on the times he was writing or particular works like our previous biography that we just talked about does. It has the whole sprawling story of James Baldwin's life, and I found that really interesting to follow.
I mean, I felt like I knew a, quite a bit about James Baldwin, only to discover I really didn't know that much at all. I just admire him so much as a writer, as a person, straight across the board. I have literally one picture of a writer in my room, and it's James Baldwin in my study.
And it's so lovely how you can learn so much about someone you already love, and it's just really adds layers of depth to meaning, and you find so much about random things about, like, when Baldwin meets famous people, like, you figure he knew these people, but there's actually accounts and letters and different things of these meetings, and that's something that Boggs includes in the biography.
Yes, I particularly liked Baldwin's meeting of Richard Wright. But and also for 24 and a half hours, Ron Butler, boy, is he taking us through it and just is so interesting as a narrator. Why don't we hear a little bit and then we can talk some more about his narration? Because I've always liked Ron Butler, but man, I'm falling in love with him all over again, too.
Yes, for sure, and I want listeners to pay particular attention to how he performs Baldwin's voice when the biography quotes him.
All right, this is Baldwin, a love story by Nicholas Boggs, read by Ron Butler.
Buford soon vanished too, driven by pent-up anger and his perception of Baldwin's neglect. As Baldwin explained to Mary, I can only reconstruct it now, mainly from what Richard Olney told me, and from what I know I feel about Buford in a general way, that is, my impatience with his softness. Apparently, Buford was offended when Baldwin used the term old aunties in his presence, as he thought Baldwin was talking about him when, as Baldwin claimed, he was referencing an epithet that Arnold had used against him in one of their many fights. But Buford was most demonstrably hurt when Baldwin turned to Richard instead of to him for comfort during a crying jag, as Baldwin explained it to Mary, in which he wept in Richard's arms and seemed to wish to avoid Buford. He admitted that, "I remember this, the weeping, I mean, and I suppose I simply could not have endured, then, Buford's species of comfort." It was at this moment that Buford fled the apartment in Clamart and vanished into the Parisian streets, as Baldwin recalled.
And that's the Buford Delaney we were talking about earlier, the artist. But yeah, he is so brilliant because he doesn't mimic Baldwin, but you can hear those traces of Baldwin in his voice.
Yes, yes, it could have been so easy to overperform, but he really just
Absolutely.
seasons
Exactly.
things, yeah.
It's not a Baldwin stew as much as a stew with a trace of Baldwin mixed in.
Yes, exactly, and, I also appreciate the way he performs the text as a whole
Yeah.
because it's a very, very long audiobook, but Butler really strikes a very nice rhythm and cadence to keep your attention. Also, he doesn't perform too slowly or too quickly. A lot of narrators these days, I feel, are very much slower in their performance, and it makes me twitch a little, but I feel like Butler strikes a perfect balance.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really enjoying listening to this book a lot. So I'm glad you chose it.
Yes.
So I get to talk about
Yes,
it.
and one of the things that also unites all these biographies and memoirs is that all of the writers also experience some kind of disability. Baldwin experienced depression and suicidal ideation for most of his life, and that's something that really impacted his health and his ability to write. And so I think that's something also to think about is that I never knew that about Baldwin either. Listening to all of these audiobooks together about these different Black writers and their lives and different countries around the world. It was just really like the universe like meant for me to listen to them together because I found so many connecting threads between the three of them.
Thank you so much. A pleasure as always.
Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.
This Friday, we have a bonus edition of Behind the Mic. We have Who's Listening. And Who's Listening, for listeners who might not know, is where we talk with top authors, narrators, and others about how and why they listen to audiobooks. And this Friday, actor Courtney B. Vance will be here to talk about his audiobook listening. Dreamscape is the sponsor of today's episode of Behind the Mic. Dreamscape publishes audiobooks from authors Frida McFadden, Kirsten Proby, and Katie Robert. Explore their full catalog at dreamscapepublishing.com. Behind the Mic is produced by Jessica Lockhart, Robin Whitten, Michelle Cobb, Stephen Cummings, Leslie Fine, Alan Menskoff, Alex Ritchie, Laura Rossi, and Kendra Winchester are our contributors. Jennifer Dell and Coco McCracken are our editors. And the music is William Ross Chernoff's Nomads 4-Way. And I'm your host, Joe Reed. Good listening.